Welcome to my new discussion on social philosophy. This discussion will cover the definition and nature of social philosophy, its necessity, and its relationship with sociology. Presented by Feel for Philosophy.
So let's talk about the blueprint of our world. We're going to dive into a field that doesn't just describe the society we live in, but actually tries to design a better one. And that field is social philosophy.
Let's just jump right in with a question. Have you ever, just looked around at our society, our laws, our culture, our values, and had that nagging thought, is this really the best we can do? I'm not talking about how it all functions, but how it should function. Well, that very question, that little gap you feel between the is and the should be, that's the absolute heart of a super interesting field called social philosophy. Its whole purpose is to really get under the hood and study the fundamental nature of our society and maybe, just maybe, imagine its ideal future. But okay, how does it actually do that? What's the secret sauce here? Well, let's start by looking at its core nature, which really revolves around this powerful idea of the ought to be. This right here, this really nails the key difference. See, on one side, you've got most of the social sciences we're familiar with, like sociology or economics. They are descriptive. Their job is to tell us what society is. They're kind of like reporters, right? They gather the facts, they collect the data, and they describe reality. But social philosophy? Totally different ballgame. It's normative. It doesn't just report on the world, it asks what the world ought to be. It's all about the ideal. So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, it's got a few key ingredients. First off, it's driven by values and ideals, the big goals a society should be aiming for. Second, like we just said, it's normative, which means it's constantly holding our social world up to the light and judging it against those ideals. It's also super critical and rational. It doesn't just accept things because that's the way it's always been. And finally, it takes what's called a synthetic view, which basically means it's trying to see the whole forest, not just the individual trees, how everything from laws to family fits together.
All right, so if we're talking about these big ideals, what kinds of massive questions are we actually trying to answer here? Let's take a look at the scope of social philosophy and see what's on the table. It's pretty huge. It dives right into that timeless tug-of-war between the rights of the individual and the needs of the group. Seriously, where do you draw that line?
And what about this one? It puts tradition under the microscope in a world that's always screaming for the new thing, for modernity. What do we keep? And what's got to go? And honestly, that's just scratching the surface. Social philosophy goes deep. It asks questions like, is society a natural thing or is it something we just kind of made up? What's the real purpose of institutions like marriage? How should we deal with things like crime and punishment in a just way? It even puts the whole idea of private property on trial and examines that crucial, often tense relationship between you and the state. It's big, big stuff. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Hang on, this sounds a little bit like sociology. And you're not wrong. They're definitely cousins. But the way they approach things is fundamentally different. So let's break down this tale of two disciplines. This table lays it all out perfectly. Let's just walk through it. When it comes to their nature, sociology is normative. It's about what should be. Sociology, on the other hand, is factual. It's about what is. That, of course, shapes their subject. Philosophy is all about ideals and values, while sociology is busy with social facts and processes. Now for their approach. Philosophy is axiological, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's always evaluating things, making judgments. Sociology, it's just trying to describe them. And finally, their methods are completely different. Philosophy uses logic and critical thinking, while sociology uses scientific, data-driven, empirical methods. Okay, if that still feels a little abstract, don't worry, I've got the perfect metaphor that's going to make this all click into place, I promise. Let's talk about the architect and the builder. Just let that one sink in for a second. If sociology is a builder collecting materials and describing the structure, social philosophy is the architect who designs the ideal plan. Honestly, if you remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. It's brilliant. So think about it. The builder, that's sociology, is on the ground. They're practical. They've got their hard hat on, they're measuring tape out, they're analyzing the materials, describing the structure as it stands today. Their fundamental question is always, what is? They give us the hard facts about the building we're all living in. But then you have the architect. That's social philosophy. The architect stands back. They look at the whole picture. They dream. They draw up the blueprint for a better, a stronger, a more beautiful building. They evaluate the current structure and say, we can do better. Their fundamental question is always, what ought to be? They give us the vision for the society we could build.
And here's the thing, you absolutely need both, right? A great architect has to understand the building materials. A great builder needs a blueprint to follow. We have to know what is before we can even begin to build what ought to be. Which brings us to the final, and I think most important question, the one that social philosophy asks every single one of us. Now that you understand the architect's role, what's in your blueprint for a better society?
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support encourages me to create more content. Thank you.